The early morning sun cast long shadows across the pine-carpeted hills of Montana, painting the rugged landscape in muted golds and soft blues. Somewhere between the trees, a German shepherd, his fur matted with blood, dirt, and thorns, emerged, slowly from the forest edge. Across his broad back lay the limp body of a small girl, no older than 7, her tangled blonde hair falling like threads of straw over the dog's flank. Her arms hung motionless. One shoe was missing. Sheriff James. Reynolds stood frozen on the porch of his cabin, coffee mug tilting in his hand, forgotten as dark liquid sloshed over his knuckles. He'd seen his share of strange sights in 20 years of military service and 3 years wearing the badge in Pinewood Creek. But nothing like this. The dog limped, clearly exhausted, each step a testament to sheer willpower. And yet, his eyes, those intelligent amber eyes, remained fixed on the sheriff as if guided by purpose, not desperation. He crossed the final stretch of pine needle-covered ground and halted 20 feet from the porch, lowering his head slightly, but refusing to let the girl slide from his back. Reynolds took one slow step forward, hands raised, his instincts kicking. A wild animal might bolt. A trained one might react. "Easy, boy," he said softly, the same tone he once used with military canines in Afghanistan. "I'm not going to hurt her." The dog didn't growl, didn't flinch. Instead, his body remained tense, watchful, but not aggressive. Reynolds could see now the tactical harness obscured beneath the filth and blood. A reinforced chest strap, molly webbing. This was no stray. This was a service dog, one that had been trained for missions that went beyond obedience and loyalty. 5 feet away now, Reynolds could make out the girl more clearly. Pale face smudged with dirt, scratches along her arms, and shallow breaths. Lifting her chest, she was alive but barely. "Let me help," Reynolds said again, as if in response the dog sank slowly to the ground, easing the child onto the earth with heartbreaking care. Then he sat back, positioning himself between the girl and the world, guarding her still. Reynolds knelt to check her pulse, rapid but strong, dehydrated, cold, but alive. He glanced at the dog, who hadn't moved an inch. "Good boy," Reynolds whispered. It was then that he noticed the small worn collar beneath the harness, and tucked just beneath the leather, sealed in a weatherproof compartment, a metal plate. Military issue. Reynolds slid it free and opened it. Inside, a folded scrap of paper, and beneath that, a memory card. The sheriff's hands trembled slightly. Whatever. This dog had carried from the forest wasn't just a child, it was a message, and possibly a warning. And as he looked back into the dog's eyes, something told him. This was just the beginning. Pinewood Creek wasn't the kind of place that showed up on most maps. Tucked between the steep ridges of the Bitterroot Mountains and a sea of whispering pines, it was the sort of town where people measured distance in minutes, not miles, and where newcomers were noticed before they even got out of their trucks. The air smelled of wood smoke and river moss, and life moved with a slowness that had less to do with laziness and more to do with tradition. Everyone knew everyone, or thought they did. Sheriff James Reynolds had once been Pinewood Creek's favorite son. Born and raised here, he left to serve in the Army Rangers as a K-9 handler, chasing ghosts across the world's darkest corners. 15 years later, he returned a widower. His wife Marie lost to cancer, his only son Mark estranged and working as a deputy in the next county over. People still waved when they saw him, offered a pie or a beer, but behind the kindness was something softer, pity. He lived alone in a log cabin just outside town limits, keeping company with silence and the occasional memory. 3 days had passed since the German shepherd, now identified only by the name stitched into his harness, Ranger, had brought the girl to Reynolds's porch, and still she hadn't spoken a single word. She sat now on the couch in his cabin, wrapped in an old flannel blanket, eyes flickering toward the window every few minutes as though expecting someone, or something, to appear from the trees. Her frame was fragile, like a fawn startled mid-step. She drank water slowly, ate sparingly, but mostly she just watched. Ranger never left her side. Reynolds had known this silence before, in soldiers, in children pulled from bombed villages. It was a kind of silence that had weight. It wasn't that she couldn't speak. It was that something inside her wouldn't let her. He hadn't taken her to the town clinic immediately. His instincts, forged in war and refined by grief, told him this wasn't something to trust to bureaucracy. Instead, he called Dr. Sarah Mitchell, someone he trusted like few others. Sarah had known him since they were 10, building tree forts and throwing pine cones at each other until dusk. She had grown into a fiercely smart, fiercely kind woman who returned to Pinewood Creek after medical school to take over her father's modest veterinary practice, which, in a town this small, also doubled as a human medical clinic more often than not. When Sarah arrived at the cabin, she moved into action like the professional she was. She checked the girl's vitals, noted the dehydration, the bruises, the small scars along her wrists and back. But it wasn't until she gently turned the child's head to check for signs of concussion that she froze. Behind the girl's ear, faint but unmistakable, was a tattoo, a simple triangle. Inside it, an eye. Sarah looked at Reynolds, her expression tight. "I've seen this symbol before," she said quietly. "About 7 years ago. A woman from the Light of Salvation Church came in for prenatal care. She had the same tattoo. I never saw her again." The Light of Salvation Church sat 17 miles up a winding road from town, a compound built on private land under the towering leadership of Reverend Ethan Carter. The church started small, just a chapel and a few cabins, but over the years, it had grown into a self-sufficient commune with farmland, housing, and its own school. Carter's Sunday sermons drew nearly half the town. He was charismatic, eloquent, and had a smile that made people believe in something, anything. Reynolds had always kept a respectful distance. Faith was personal. But Sarah had never hidden her unease. "Ethan Carter looks at this town like it's a crop to harvest," she once told him over black coffee and too many memories. "And he's got roots in every household that's too tired, too broke, or too afraid to push back." Now, faced with a child bearing the church's symbol, injured, silent, and escorted by a military K-9 trained to protect her, those uneasy feelings solidified into dread. The girl, when asked her name, said nothing, but she listened. Her eyes, bright blue and impossibly sad, missed nothing. Ranger responded to her every move. When she flinched, he growled. When she whimpered in her sleep, he whined and nosed her shoulder gently until she settled. And then came the marks. Circular scars on her wrists, a matching pattern on her back. Sarah pressed her lips together as she treated the wounds. "These aren't accidents, Jim," she said. "They're deliberate, repeated. And that tattoo, that's not just spiritual, that's branding." They both looked at Ranger, lying with his head on the girl's lap, his body always between her and the door. Reynolds reached out and lifted. The flap of the harness again. The material was torn, stained with old blood. But underneath the grime there was a metal tag, U.S. Army K-9 unit, and beneath it, a name, Ranger. Reynolds's heart kicked, military, like him. He opened the collar pouch again and pulled out the memory card. Still sealed. He hadn't dared plug it into anything yet, but something told him it was going to change everything. "Do you think she came from the compound?" Sarah asked, her voice low. "I think she ran," Reynolds said, staring at the child. "I think something inside that place terrified her enough to run 17 miles through forest and barbed wire. And I think someone, or something, sent Ranger to bring her out." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the soft crackle of the cabin fire and the girl's slow, steady breaths. Outside, the wind carried the distant echo of church bells, but inside, something far older and darker was beginning to stir. Part 2. The Reverend, the Silence, and the Drawing. The next morning arrived with an eerie stillness, the kind that pressed against the cabin walls like a held breath. Reynolds had just poured a second cup of coffee when the sound of tires crunching. Gravel stirred Ranger from his position by the sofa. The dog rose instantly, hackles raised, body stiff and alert. Through the window, Reynolds saw them. 2 black SUVs rolling slowly up the dirt driveway, their tinted windows catching the early light. On the lead vehicle's door glinted a symbol, a golden triangle with an eye inside, the same symbol tattooed behind the girl's ear. The second SUV stopped 10 feet behind the first. 4 men exited, dressed in matching black shirts bearing the church's emblem. They stood like silent sentries, eyes scanning the cabin. From the front car emerged Reverend Ethan Carter. He looked exactly as the town remembered him. Tall, silver-haired, immaculately dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that caught none of the dust of the Montana road. His presence radiated authority, his smile serene. But his eyes, sharp, pale, and cold, missed nothing. "Sheriff Reynolds," he called smoothly, stepping toward the porch with practiced confidence. "I believe you found my daughter." Behind Reynolds, the child had gone rigid. She clutched Ranger's fur so tightly her knuckles turned white. The dog responded with a low growl, positioning himself between her and the door. Reynolds stepped outside, closing the door gently behind him. "Didn't expect company this early, Reverend," he said evenly, hands resting casually near his. "Psst. Especially not with backup." "I understand. It's been a stressful few days," Carter replied, gesturing to the men behind him. "Lily wandered off from our compound. She has difficulties, as I'm sure you've noticed. We've been searching the grounds, but yesterday we learned she may have made it this far. She's not said a word since she arrived," Reynolds noted. Carter's expression softened, an actor adjusting to a new scene. "She hasn't spoken. Since her mother's passing. Selective mutism, they call it. Trauma response. Poor thing can't ask for help even when she needs it most." One of the men stepped forward and handed Reynolds a folder. "Birth certificate," the Reverend explained. "Lily Grace Carter, medical records, school documentation, everything to confirm her identity." Reynolds thumbed through the documents. They looked real, legitimate, but the girls trembling behind the door spoke louder than any paperwork. "I'll need time to verify these," he said. "Of course," Carter replied, though the tightness in his jaw belied the ease in his voice. "I'd like to take her home in the meantime. She needs familiar surroundings, her own bed, her family." Reynolds' eyes narrowed slightly. "She hasn't indicated she recognizes you. Or anyone. She's been through an ordeal. You're a man of service, Sheriff. You understand how trauma works." Before Reynolds could respond, the door creaked behind him. The girl had stepped onto the porch, Ranger glued to her side. Her tiny frame was partially hidden behind the dog's body, but her wide eyes locked onto the Reverend and filled with unmistakable fear. The transformation in Carter's expression was subtle, almost imperceptible, a flicker of calculation. "Beneath the concern, Lily," he said gently, holding out a hand. "Come here, sweetheart." She didn't move. Ranger let out a deeper growl, barely restrained. "Easy," Reynolds warned. Then, slowly, the girl reached into the front pocket of her flannel shirt and pulled out something small and crumpled. She walked forward 1 step, not toward Carter but toward Reynolds. With shaking hands, she pressed the item into his palm. It was a child's drawing. Reynolds unfolded it carefully. Crayon lines formed a crude house with a triangle above the door. Inside the triangle was an eye. Outside, stick figures dressed in black stood in a circle. One small figure, marked with red dots on its arms, stood apart, clutching the leash of a large dog. A cold chill ran down Reynolds' spine. The drawing was no mere doodle. It was a message. A cry for help in the only language she still trusted. He folded the paper and slipped it into his breast pocket. Behind him, the girl had retreated once more. Ranger stood like a stone wall between her and the men in black. "I need to verify these documents with the county," Reynolds said firmly. "And I'd like Dr. Mitchell to complete a full report before any transfer of custody." Carter's smile faltered for the first time. "Sheriff, surely, it's protocol. You understand." For a moment, the tension thickened. The men behind Carter shifted slightly, muscles tightening under their sleeves. Trained, not just pious. Security, not disciples. Finally, Carter inclined his head. Very well. But I do expect a call once she's stable. We miss her terribly. I'll be in touch. The SUVs departed in a plume of dust. Inside, Sarah looked up from the kitchen table as Reynolds entered. The girl sat on the sofa again. Ranger curled tightly around her like a second skin. What did he say? Sarah asked. He said she's his daughter. Sarah snorted softly. And you? I asked for time, bought us 24 hours. He pulled the drawing from his pocket and placed it on the table. Sarah's eyes widened as she took it in. Jesus. The red marks matched the burn scars on her arms. And the symbol, it's not just spiritual, it's ritualistic. She's not Lily Carter, Sarah whispered. Not his daughter. No, Reynolds agreed. She's someone else. And she ran from that compound for a reason. The girl looked at them from across the room, still silent, still fragile. But in her silence, a storm was gathering, and it had only just begun. It started with another drawing. Reynolds had been poring over the memory card, its contents encrypted, unreadable without specialized tools, when the girl tugged gently at his sleeve. She held out a new piece of paper, folded into quarters, smudged with pencil and crayon. He opened it, expecting more symbols, more eerie depictions of figures in black. But what he saw made him freeze. Two identical stick-figure girls stood side by side, holding hands. One of them had a dog at her feet. The other was enclosed in what looked like a box with a lock drawn on it. He looked at the child. Her expression was solemn, determined. She pointed at herself, then at the figure with the dog. Then she touched. The other girl in the drawing tapped the box and placed her hand over her heart. Reynolds understood. You have a sister, he whispered. She nodded, her first deliberate response since arriving. And she's still there. With them, another. Nod. Sarah, standing behind the girl, put a hand to her mouth. They didn't just take her. They split them up. Twins. One escaped, the other kept as leverage, or worse. Reynolds' thoughts spiraled, but the girl wasn't done. She reached into her pocket and retrieved a small, tarnished metal object. Dog. Tags, strung on a broken chain. She pressed them into Reynolds' palm. He turned them over. Miller, Jessica L., USMC. Christian. Reynolds' breath caught. He sat down heavily in the chair, eyes never leaving the tag. Jessica Miller. The name hit him like a ghost. He remembered her, a Marine K-9 handler he'd briefly worked alongside during a joint training operation in Afghanistan. Quiet, sharp, deadly with a dog at her side. They hadn't been close, but he remembered. The calm authority in her voice, the way her dog mirrored her energy with eerie precision. The girl had these. And the dog she arrived with, Ranger, wore military gear, responded to commands, guarded her like a mother would her child. Jessica Miller's dog. Sarah read the name over his shoulder. You knew her? I served with her, Reynolds said slowly. Not long, but I remember her. She was solid. He looked at Ranger, now resting beside the girl but watching Reynolds closely, as if awaiting the next command. She gave the dog her daughter, he said aloud, the realization sinking in. She trained him to find help, to find me, the Kaiba. Next call Reynolds made wasn't to the sheriff's office or to child services. It was to an old army buddy, Michael Cortez, who now worked with the military's K-9 unit in Virginia. Cortez answered on the second ring. Reynolds? Damn, been a while. Need a check on a service dog, Reynolds said. Name's Ranger, German Shepherd. Last handler, Jessica Miller. Silence stretched across the line. Where'd you hear that name? She just found me. Another pause. Jim, I'm texting you a secure number. Call from a burner. This line's not safe. 2 hours later, at a payphone in Pinewood's only gas station, Reynolds spoke to someone who identified himself as Agent Daniel Walker. With the Department of Defense. Sheriff Reynolds, the voice said after verifying his credentials. What you're about to hear is classified. I'm listening. Staff Sergeant Jessica Miller didn't die in service. She was recruited post-discharge for an undercover assignment. Target, Light of Salvation Church. Reynolds closed his eyes. She went inside? She lived in the compound for 3 years, gathered intel on weapons stockpiling, potential child trafficking, and links to domestic terrorism. 3 months ago, we lost contact. She and Ranger vanished. We feared compromise. She trained the dog, Reynolds said slowly, to find her daughter if something happened. Walker's tone sharpened. Exactly. You said she arrived with a child? Yes, 7, maybe 8. Silent, tattooed with the church's emblem. Scars consistent with abuse. Sheriff, this is now a federal matter. Our team is mobilizing, but we need 72 hours. She has a twin, Reynolds said, still in the compound. Silence again. Then, understood. Protect the child. Do. Not let Carter reclaim her. But Carter wasn't waiting. Later that night, a new vehicle appeared on Reynolds' long driveway. A sleek black SUV, different from the others, without decals or church insignias. No one got out. They just sat, engine running, lights off, far enough to avoid confrontation but close enough to send a message someone was watching. We have to move her, Sarah said. Tonight. They packed quickly. Reynolds drove them deep into the mountains to an old hunting cabin he hadn't visited in years. Off-grid, unmapped, known only to one other person, his estranged son, Mark. She's not safe, he told Sarah as they drove. Carter's not just trying to reclaim a runaway. He's trying to cover up whatever she saw. And her sister, Sarah asked. If he knows she's escaped, then he's already moving the other one, maybe worse. That night, in the glow of a single lantern, the girl drew again. A calendar, 3 days circled in red. Underneath the triangle eye, around it, 20 stick figures. She's warning us, Sarah whispered. They're planning something, a ritual, an event, and she ran to stop it. Reynolds looked at Ranger, whose gaze never left the window, ears twitching at every sound. This wasn't just a coincidence. Jessica Miller had disappeared, but she'd left behind the one thing she trusted to finish what she started. Her dog, her daughter, and now, Sheriff James Reynolds. The fire lookout tower had long been forgotten by most of Pinewood County. Perched atop a steep ridge above the timberline, it once served as an early warning post during wildfire season. Now, its rusted frame and creaking wooden stairs made it more a relic than a refuge, but to Sheriff Reynolds it was the only place left that no one would think to look. He, Sarah, the girl and Ranger arrived just before dawn, their breath fogging in the chill mountain air. The girl was exhausted, her small body limp in Reynolds' arms, but she did not protest. Ranger led the way up the narrow staircase, pausing only to glance back, as if urging them onward. Inside the tower, the air smelled of dust and pine. A single room with wraparound windows, a desk and an old radio console. It was sparse but defensible. Sarah laid the girl on a makeshift bed of blankets while Reynolds secured the entrance below. He kept the lights low. Visibility was their enemy. Now, they weren't alone for long. An hour after sunrise, a vehicle appeared on a distant ridge. Even without binoculars, Reynolds recognized the dark silhouette of a county patrol cruiser. Mark, his son. Reynolds wasn't sure whether relief or dread hit harder. When Mark reached the top of the tower, he didn't speak right away. He entered, with his hand near his sidearm, gaze sweeping the room until it landed on the girl curled up beside Ranger. "This is her?" he asked quietly. Reynolds nodded. "The one they're trying to reclaim. I've been told you abducted a child from the hospital, that you're obstructing a legal investigation." Mark's voice was neutral, professional. "And I'm telling you," Reynolds said, "she's not who Carter says she is." Mark's jaw clenched. He glanced at the girl again. She looked back, silent, expression unreadable. But then, slowly, she lifted a new drawing, Two girls, identical. One inside a locked room, the other surrounded by dark figures. A third figure, taller, a woman, beneath the chapel floor. Mark studied it, the hard shell in his eyes cracking just slightly. She has a twin, Reynolds said. And a mother, Jessica Miller. Mark stiffened. Jessica Miller is missing, presumed dead. She's alive, Reynolds countered. And that child, he pointed to the girl, is her daughter. This is no custody dispute. This is a rescue. Before Mark could reply, Ranger snapped upright. A low growl rumbled in his throat. Moments later, footsteps echoed up the staircase. 3 men appeared in the doorway, armed, dressed in dark tactical gear marked with the triangle and eye insignia. Church security, not police. Hand over the girl, their leader ordered. Reverend, Carter wants his daughter back. Now. Reynolds stepped in front of the girl, his hand resting on his holster. She's not his daughter, the man sneered. She's property of the light of salvation. You're trespassing on a sacred operation. Ranger moved first. At a subtle hand signal from Reynolds, the German shepherd launched forward, teeth sinking into the lead intruder's arm and driving him back into the stairwell. Chaos erupted, yelling, scuffling, weapons raised. Reynolds fired once into the ceiling. Federal investigation, he shouted. Stand down. Mark, eyes wide, took 3 steps toward the attackers, weapon now drawn. I said, stand down. He echoed. You're out of your jurisdiction. But they didn't back off. Then the radio crackled to life. This is Agent Walker, came the voice. Sheriff Reynolds, you are not alone. Confirm visual on the girl. Lily Miller, daughter of embedded agent Jessica Miller. Confirmation established. Everyone froze. Walker continued, his voice edged with urgency. You are to protect the child and hold your position. Reinforcements en route. Repeat, protect the child. She is our only link to the compound. The armed men hesitated, exchanging glances. Mark moved beside his father, gun steady. You heard him. This is over. In minutes, the intruders were zip-tied, weapons confiscated. Ranger returned to the girl's side, his tongue lolling, tail still and alert. Mark turned to Reynolds. You were right. Reynolds nodded, his throat too tight to speak. That night, while they waited for the extraction team, the girl handed Reynolds one last drawing. This one showed a woman, shackled in a dark room, a triangle above her. Reynolds turned to Sarah. She's saying her mom is under the chapel. When the team arrived, Reynolds insisted on joining the raid. At dawn, under federal coordination, multiple units descended on the Light of Salvation compound. Carter was nowhere to be found, but in a hidden basement beneath the chapel, they found her, Jessica Miller. Gaunt, injured, but alive. She whispered one word. Emma. Reverend Carter, it turned out, had already escaped, taking Emma with him in a helicopter launched from a hidden clearing deep in the forest. The girl, Lily, watched from the safety of the command post, eyes locked on the horizon. The reunion. Would have to wait, but they were close now, closer than ever, and Reynolds, Sarah, Mark, and Ranger were ready to bring her sister home. Dawn broke with the faint promise of redemption, sunlight spilling over the pine ridges as federal teams swept through the compound like a wave. The children, 23 of them, were led out one by one, dazed, blinking at the sudden freedom. Some cried, some clung to strangers, but none looked back. Inside the mobile command center, Reynolds stood beside Jessica Miller. She hadn't yet embraced Lily. Her injuries made movement painful, and her emotional state even more fragile. But when their eyes met across the quiet medical bay, there was no need for words. The connection sparked instantly. Lily reached forward and gently placed her mother's dog tags in Jessica's hand. Jessica's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, Lily smiled. It was small, barely there, but it was real. Still, one absence loomed large, Emma. Reverend Carter had vanished, like a shadow before the storm, taking the other twin with him. Satellite intel confirmed the helicopter's trajectory westward, but the final destination was still unknown. "I trained Ranger for this," Jessica told Reynolds, voice raspy but clear. "If anyone can find Emma, he can." And Reynolds believed. Because this entire story, this improbable, heart-wrenching journey, had begun with a dog who refused to let go of a mission, who had crossed miles of wilderness to place a broken child in the arms of the one man who still remembered what it meant to protect something with your whole soul. As the sun climbed higher, painting the world in hopeful gold, Reynolds found himself back on the ridge above the compound. Mark stood beside him, Ranger at their feet. "She's somewhere out there," Reynolds said. "And we're going to bring her home," Mark replied. They said nothing else. They didn't need to. Behind them, Lily sat in the grass beside her mother, drawing again, this time with brighter colors. She sketched two girls hand in hand, a big dog beside them, and a cabin under a wide blue sky. She looked up, caught Reynolds. Ian nodded once. The road back to her sister had begun, and whatever it took, they would follow it to the end, because some missions are more than orders. Some are promises.